Today, we are talking about synthesizing and communicating evidence using as a case study efforts to reopen schools in the Bay Area in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Policymaking during the pandemic has been uniquely challenging. First, decision-making has had to happen rapidly under stressful circumstances and often with limited information. Second, the role of science and scientists has been undermined just when it has its greatest importance. And third, our debates have often been inappropriately framed as a battle between the public health needs of our communities and the economic needs of our communities. In the midst of these challenges, a number of critical issues have frequently gone unnoticed: equity, the social, emotional, and learning needs of our children, and the voices of the parents. We're going to discuss how these issues have been navigated in the Bay Area in the context of school reopening policies. And we are privileged to have 4 panelists. First, we have Jenny Lamb. Commissioner Lamb is a member of the San Francisco Board of Education. Yvette Edwards is an executive member with Decreasing the Distance. Sailaja Suresh is a senior director at Oakland Unified School District. Dr. Naomi Bardock, who's an associate professor of pediatrics and policy in the Department of Pediatrics, and the Philip R. Lee Institute for Health Policy Studies at UCSF.
And so while I followed the news that was being pushed out in March broadly via the media, I honestly didn't have any information related at all to how COVID infected people, transmission rates, how it was going to affect children. None of us did, right? And I didn't really have a doctor or someone on call that I could reach out to kind of answer those questions. So like everyone else in mid-March, I basically was thinking I will never send my children back to school.
Having to make that decision to close our schools was a difficult one, probably one of the hardest difficult decisions since I've served on the board, because I knew what that really meant over a duration, not just of the closure of schools, but what that meant for our students, what it meant for our families, and that we knew we're going to be embarking on a new path and life journey that we just haven't been part of, and that's going to shake up completely the public education system. This is new territory as we're not public health experts at the school district, and we've had to really jump in. How do we build up testing capacity? How do we look at understanding the data and what makes sense between the different ages of our children?
It started out with the research questions, which were how can we get kids back to school safely in a way that's safe for them, for their families, and for teachers. And in order to answer that question, I actually needed a co-design approach. It meant that I had to go talk to the teachers and talk to the school superintendents and talk to the San Francisco Department of Public Health, because we couldn't design a study to try and answer those questions without getting input from everybody. And so trying to make sure that there's no sense of I'm going to find the best data to support my perspective and not support somebody else's perspective when we are all in it together. And the thing to fight against is the bad effects of COVID-19, rather than I have a position that we're supposed to be doing something and I want to win against another group of the population.
It's about researchers and scientists that are also listening and understanding to what we're hearing from our stakeholders, and that absolutely the emotional, fear is real, and that it is not only is it, the emotions, it's actually the life impact. As we're seeing it, disproportionately impacting for example, the Latinx community or in the Southeast neighborhoods of San Francisco. And so we have to lead with that and that recognition. And folks really just want to be heard of how do we pair up with our scientists, with public health experts, and how that pairing up with community also builds trust.
And so just knowing that there are these two-way communication channels open to us is really important, and is, I think, another kind of foundation of trust that we can also share with our community.
I reached out to Dr. Bardock many times, be like, how do we navigate this? What's the latest data? Who do we need to bring to the table? Just for perhaps even for my own learning, and then really trying to look at how we're going to bring our stakeholders along.
One of the things that I feel like is potentially the most helpful thing that I've encouraged people to do, and is not always possible, but I think is a powerful structural approach, is to bring everybody together in the room. So I've given these talks, and I continue to give talks to people about the evidence and about the implications on mental health and all the stuff about school reopening. But it tends to be that it's one audience at a time. And I do think it's really helpful for everybody to be in the room at the same time and ask hard questions of the science and of the scientist. And I actually feel like the biggest reason is because there's a lot of different conflicting evidence out there. And so I think if everybody can hear everybody else's questions and everybody's challenges, then it's much easier to get to a shared understanding that then you can move forward from.
The real challenge there is kind of the disconnect between the scientific community doing the research, understanding what works, and then being able to translate that into actual public health policy, and then being able to translate that into actual communication that goes out into the community that is translatable and relatable and understandable.
Sometimes there academic institutions will put together very, very, very long lists, extremely thorough documentation of all the different studies that are available around COVID-19 or around, any kind of topic, but you can find a lot of them on COVID-19 because as academics and researchers, sometimes we're trained. We have to be perfect. We have to know every single study, and comprehensiveness wins the day. And I think what is the most important piece about how we do this communication and how we're going to move forward together as a community of academics, not to just say, here's the long list of studies, but to actually help people interpret those studies and to say, these are the ones that are the most rigorous studies that teach us the most about what to do or about what not to do. So I think one of the reflections I've had about my role in this is that as an implementation scientist, somebody who thinks about how do things work on the ground, I think that actually has been why I've had a helpful perspective for people, is because my interpretation of the evidence is always, what are the actionable implications for schools, for families, for teachers about the new science that's coming out? How does it inform us to do this thing right?
There's all this information out there, but if we aren't giving it to people in digestible chunks of information, really sort of tailored to what their wants and needs are, they aren't going to be able to make an informed decision. And that was concerning. Eventually, I'd say probably around the time when the hubs began to open, managed to find a lecture from Dr. Bardock that talked about how children weren't necessarily the carriers, how touch tracing was different. And that lecture for me brought my anxiety and thus this entire household's experience down completely. It was the way that she explained not only the science, but why behind the science that I had never heard at any point during my research at all. But once I received that information and started looking at the science and started following those lectures, it definitely led me to believe, okay, this is possible. It can be safely done. It can affect people's lives. That lecture changed the way I looked at everything. And I thought to myself, I need more people to hear this. The other thing about, finding it was then how do you disseminate it? How do you really get it out there in a meaningful and impactful way? A lot of people are working, they're busy, and the narratives were very confusing.
That's been our goal, actually, is to help do that translation. So it's not just like, here's this long comprehensive list, nor is it, here's one study and I'm going to scare you by, from the media. It's trying to help people integrate all the information in a way that's helpful for them. My general feeling is that I'm a little bit of an educator. I bring an educator lens to it, which is that I just want people to learn what it is and to help them integrate all of the different studies together. And so that's why I actually think that structure of having all the different stakeholders in the room talking at the same time with each other and hearing each other's questions and the questions being answered can be a very powerful model. I'm trying to fill a space that I think is deeply needed, where I try not to say that there's a right answer, and I try to help people think about what is the process we need to go through to try and make sure that we try and do this as right as possible with the information that we have, right? Because it's in clinical medicine, sometimes you have to make decisions about how to treat something without knowing for sure all of the information. You just don't know exactly how somebody's going to respond to a medication. You don't know exactly what's going to happen next, but you have to make a decision with the best information you have. And that's kind of what I feel like about making these decisions about COVID-19, is that in a world of uncertainty, there's a couple really important principles, which is always stay dedicated to having making those decisions with the best information you have at the time, and keeping in mind all of the different perspectives at once, so you're not having a bias in what you're in how you look for that information.
We don't have all the answers right now, but we will continue to consult the experts. We will continue to look at the data, and we will continue to try to make the decisions we can based on the best data that we have in front of us.
Our children are counting on us. Our children's livelihood is depending on us. And so that is why we absolutely need to come together to address and come up with solutions